What is the one story you want to tell that you can never fit into a conversation? Story 1. I've posted this once before, but I accidentally peed off a crow. Long story short, for boys about 10 or 11 years old pass by my house every week to go swimming, and every week, 4 weeks in a row, the same boy gets SHD on by a giant crow in front of my house. Of course, we thought this was really funny, but it never occurred to us at the time that he must have done something to get peed on by the crows. I had put some bird food in my yard and was trying to get rid of the wild pigeons that were coming in so much. Soon after, I realized that I was always being caught at by crows. Everywhere I went, the crows would get mad at me. So I Googled crows and learned that they hold grudges, recognize people, and tell other crows about bad people. So I tried to make a peace offering by throwing food on the roof of my shed. There is a sink in front of my kitchen window overlooking the shed roof. After throwing the food away, I stood by the window and washed the dishes. This must have angered this crow again. That night, the crow started screeching and cawing. I went to the kitchen to see what was going on, and a huge bird droppings fell on the window. There is a large ledge over the window, so no bird droppings had fallen on that window in the past 20 years. So this crow must have put his butt on the window for this. That night I went to bed, but was awakened at 5 a.m. by screaming outside my bedroom window. I live on the first floor, so it couldn't have been a human. I Googled crow screams, and sure enough I heard the sound. The crow chose to caw outside the only window that had a light on. Later that day, there was a large crow sitting in a tree near that window. When someone went to the window, the crow stayed still, but when it spotted me, it started hopping on the branches. After pooping and screaming, I had no intention of feeding the crow that day. The next day, when I fed him, he must have gotten the hint and never again pooped on the window pane or woke me up with his screams. However, for about a year and a half, every crow in a 1-mile radius of my house cawed angrily at me. Don't PSS on the crows. Story 2. I worked in a bank call center for a short time. During my training, I was warned about a guy they called the sneeze guy. He would call in and only want to talk to women, pretending to open accounts, all the while making gestures that he really wanted to sneeze, and wanted the female representative to tell him to leave the sneezing alone. He was obviously a pre-RT and was masturbating in a woman's voice. I called him for a while before I caught him. He called me and tried to give me that CRP, but I told him that if it was that hard to look up at the lights and sneeze, he might need a doctor, and we kept talking except to set up an account. Most reps couldn't get that far. The colleague sitting next to me got the call a few hours later and hung up almost immediately. A few more hours later, she sneezed again. This time my colleague had a plan and instructed him to relax, close his eyes, and take a deep breath. She heard cursing in her headphones and hung up. Story 3. One time I was in the back of the bus, but in front of the second door at the back. I was going down the street when I noticed a guy sitting in the seat across the aisle jerking off. I mean, the whole thing was out and he was going to town. There was a mother and her 2 kids sitting in the sideways seat in front of me, and he was definitely looking at the kids. When I noticed, the bus stopped at the stop and the mother and her children, who I would guess were between the ages of 7 and 5, got up to leave through the back door. I quickly stood up, blocked their path down the aisle, and yelled, "Go out the front door." The poor mother looked at me and began to protest, but I enlarged myself and blocked their way and began to lead them to the front door. As she exited the bus, I tried to gently tell her what was going on, but she was quite angry and wouldn't let me approach and say anything. I think about this often. I was probably their villain today and may have actually saved them from real harm. Story 4. I won a Nintendo Switch and a box of cereal. The problem with telling this story is that explaining the ending isn't interesting enough to fill in the details. I had bought my favorite cereal, Honey Bunches of Oats, and was eating it for breakfast in my dorm. I woke up earlier than usual, so I had time to get to my first class. I had just finished eating the box and was going to put it out for recycling, but then I saw on the box a promotion for 500 people to win a prize pack containing a Nintendo Switch and Super Mario Odyssey. But when I looked at that campaign, it said 500 people would win a Nintendo Switch and Super Mario Odyssey. After entering all the information on the website, the screen displayed a Mario question block and asked me to click on the question block a few times. If a mushroom popped up, you won. After a few clicks, a coin popped out of the top and suddenly a mushroom slowly rose from the top of the block. I was in complete disbelief and thought, no, I probably got the instructions wrong. But I was wrong. I had gotten a Nintendo DS and Super Mario Odyssey. Everyone I told about it said, I thought it was a scam. It was pretty good. I wouldn't have been able to afford the Switch otherwise, so it's definitely a plus in my book. Story 5. A few years ago, I went to the Grand Canyon with my parents. On the way there, we stopped at a lookout where there was only us and a couple of bikers. She was sitting on the edge of the canyon with something in her hand, and he was videotaping her. We had to walk past them to get to the trail that leads into the canyon. My father and I immediately knew what the couple was doing and tried to stop and keep our distance, but my mother kept walking. Just as the woman threw something down into the canyon, the wind blew out of the canyon toward my mother. The biker couple saw what they had thrown away fly into my mother's face. It turned out to be her brother's ashes, and his last request was to scatter his ashes in the Grand Canyon. What followed was the most awkward 10 minutes of my life as they talked to my mother about the deceased. At the end of the conversation, the woman said, "He loved meeting new people, so don't take it personally." My mother replied, "It was nice to meet you and your brother too." Story 6. One time, when I was at my most depressed, I went to Target with a friend. We were in the dollar section, and he said to me, "Nice ass." He said loudly. I ignored him, not realizing that a 40 to 50-year-old woman was walking towards the exit, and I was standing right in front of her. She turned around and saw Connor standing there, obviously having just yelled and still half smiling. She looked horrified, and not wanting to embarrass her by explaining that Connor was not complimenting her ass, I walked away and grinned at her. She walked out of the store and I died of laughter, hiding in the next aisle to watch the whole thing. I remembered laughing for the first time in months. While laughing, I said in shock, I'm laughing. I'm laughing." He made me laugh. It was one of the first moments of hope that I might be able to feel joy again. It's been many years now, but the medication has saved my life and I'm happy every day. Connor and I started dating a few years later and just got engaged. Sometimes I try to explain how important it was for him to crush on me, but I don't think he really understands. But that was the moment I realized that no matter what, he was the one who could make things better. And he still makes me laugh every day. And to the Target lady, in case you're reading this, we never meant to sexually harass you. Story 7. I helped a little girl who got separated from her mother in a shopping mall. The mother takes the down escalator with her stroller, coat, and bag, and the little girl is afraid of the escalator. So she backs up and is at the top while her mother is at the bottom. There is a line behind me, but I ignore them. I hold out my hand, point to the mother, who can see us, and say, "Let's go down together." The girl doesn't speak and is clearly frightened, but takes my hand. I say, "Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3, and we get on the escalator, but she doesn't move. I try again. No luck. I squat down and ask, "Can I pick you up?" I ask, and she nods yes. The whole time, I kept reminding her that her mommy was right there and that she was going to go to her mommy. As I stood up to carry the girl down, I heard all the teenage girls caw in unison, and as a 35-year-old single guy, this story is absolute gold to women, but I have no reason to bring it up. Story 8. This past summer, my 2 friends and I were just passing the time by taking a walk along the creek. We are high school students, so we had nothing else to do. The creek wound around an elementary school, so we figured it must be some kind of daycare center. We continued down the creek and came to a gently flowing river about waist deep. As we were happily swimming down the stream, we heard the same children's voices again. I don't know how long I stayed there, but my left front leg and both back legs were caught in the roots. I had one of my friends grab my bag, and we headed for the deer. It didn't seem to struggle as I approached, so I guessed it was probably too tired to move. I lifted the fawn and carried it to the bank, which was not very steep, where I could get into the trees surrounding the river. I don't know what happened after that, but I hope they found the mother. Story 9. I made Alec Baldwin laugh, as I think I mentioned before in another sub-post. It was Halloween and I was in New York City and my office was near the West 4th Street station on 6th Avenue. I was trying to hurry to the station before the parade started. I headed for the bleachers, but there were already a lot of people in costume heading to the parade. As I speed walked down the street, I got into an awkward shuffle with someone heading in the opposite direction. I looked up and saw that the person I was doing this awkward shuffle dance with was Alec Baldwin. I'm not usually so quick-witted, and at this moment I realized I was pretty much at my peak. But I couldn't help but blurt out, "Alec Baldwin's costume, that's awesome." And he laughed. Story 10. This is a very strange story, and I don't think anyone will believe me, but I'll tell you my story anyway. About 6 years ago, I was working in fast food. I was training 60 new hires in a brand new location with no other fast food restaurants within a 30-minute perimeter, working 16 hours a day with a 30-minute break in between. The new hires were trained by 2 other experienced crew members and myself. I was hating life. One day I had lunch in the lobby, which I usually did not do. I was sitting alone when an old man asked if we could share a table. We chatted a bit. He noticed my name tag and said, "Alejo, that's my name, too." "Alejo Tedak," he said. "My full name, too." Suddenly he got serious and told me to save 10 cents for every dollar I earn. He said I should save 10 cents for emergencies and difficult situations. He had been doing that since he was 20, and it helped when he had to take time off work. We said our goodbyes and I went back to work, but I thought about him all day. I took his advice, and when he had to take time off work a few years later due to testicular cancer, I had a nice savings. Perhaps he was looking out for me in the future. Story 11. One summer, my mother found a baby seagull. She petted him. He slept on her lap and stole the dog's meow. He was attacked by a cat once, but escaped relatively unscathed. After about 8 weeks, he was able to fly, so my mother released him next door to her office. He saw us often and snuggled a bit. My mother also fed him raw shrimp. Come winter, he disappeared and we never saw him again. What a strange summer it was. Story 12. In 2011, 4 days before my 17th birthday, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. When I got home from the hospital that day, I watched Rush Hour 2, and Rush Hour 3 to feel better. We were not allowed to socialize with celebrities or ask for pictures or autographs, but I had to break that rule a bit for one celebrity. At the end of the event, I decided to wait for Detective James Carter near the exit. I approached him, shook his hand, and sent him on his way, explaining that Rush Hour had helped me get through some of the worst days of my life so far, and that it had kept me smiling during a time when smiling would have been impossible. He stopped, looked at me, and said thanks for talking to me. He then gave me a hug, wished me well, and left the venue. That's how I met Chris Tucker. Story 13. When I was a kid, I had a Supersonics hoodie. It was my favorite outfit, and I wore it all the time. One Halloween, we set off fireworks. One kid shot a Roman candle at a telephone pole. It bounced off and came right back down and landed in my hoodie pocket. It fell into my hoodie pocket. I looked for a new one, but by that point the Sonics were gone. For those of you who don't know, the Sonics were a Seattle NBA team, but the idiot Howard Schultz sold them out of town for no reason. Many years later, I was walking through the outlets and found a hoodie I used to wear. It was like seeing an old friend again. A while later, I went out for a jog wearing that hoodie, and as I was running along the path, a tree branch sticking out caught the pocket of the hoodie and ripped it right off. In the exact same pocket and on the exact same side. I don't even recognize it myself. When I got back to the outlet, of course the store was closed for good. I had my sister sew it up, but it's not as pretty as it used to be. Story 14. One day I was driving to my parents' house. The road to my parents' house was on a fairly active highway, and on the way there was a small town. As I approached the edge of town, I saw something black on the road. At first I thought it was a piece of tire, but then it raised its little head and we really saw eye to eye. It was the smallest black kitten. Luckily, I was driving slow enough not to run him over. I quickly pulled over and ran back onto the road and picked up the kitten. Before I ran onto the highway, I didn't see him. I ran back, tripped and fell on my butt, and the semi stopped in the road and honked its horn. I yelled, "I'm sorry." I yelled and picked the kitten up like Simba. The truck driver shrugged, gave me a thumbs up, and merrily drove away. I handed the kitten to my mother, who named him Midnight. He is a jerk. Story 15. This is when a 6 feet 5 inches schizophrenic patient in the psychiatric unit for 72 hours begged me to get him a jug of water from the urinal because he couldn't go to the bathroom. He could walk fine, but I wanted to keep the peace. I ran to get a new urinal and opened the urinal so he could urinate right away. As a nurse, This was the only time I was caught off guard by an inappropriate sexual gesture and completely assaulted. I was furious inside and hardened in my response. Fortunately, my wonderful colleagues took over while I sobbed in the locker room. In hindsight, it was the craziest and cruelest moment of my career, but thanks to the help I received, the patient's illness, and my dark sense of humor, I can now laugh about that panic-stricken moment. It's not a nice story to share over drinks and dinner with friends. Story 16. I used to deliver pizzas. I got to one house, knocked on the door and waited, and the semi started kamikaze-style angry dive bombing. It sounded as if they were screaming at me. This went on for several minutes without my client answering the door, and as soon as the door opened, the semi conveniently flew away. So I sat there, stressed and shocked, pizza in hand, and for some reason told my customers what happened. They don't care. They don't care. When I got back to my car, the semi was in the car. It struck me again. One of the most surreal nature interactions I have encountered. Story 17. I was at an infield concert after a baseball game. After the game, many people, myself included, were going down the stairs to the entrance of the field. Halfway down the stairs, I began to hear shouting and screaming from behind me. I stopped, turned around to see what was going on, and grabbed the arm of a woman, the cause of the commotion, who had somehow fallen down the stairs. I held her in my arms, and we looked at each other for a while before going down the stairs. How such a perfect thing happened, I will never know, but I felt like a ninja. Story 18. I finished my bartending shift in a school town one summer and headed to a friend's house for afterbar. The town was within walking distance of everything, and I was walking home from the afterbar alone around 4 a.m., which was summer, so it was fairly quiet. Suddenly, two guys on a tandem bike came up behind me. The guys barely kept the tandem bike on the street when a car drove by and slowed down. They crashed the tandem bicycle into the curb in a fantastically comical way, and the car drove off. I miss small country town life. Story 19. The wife loves Disney, and I love the Philadelphia Flyers. I took her to Disney to propose. The next day was my birthday, and as we were standing in line, the lady in front of me noticed my Flyers hat and said, "Oh, you're a Flyers fan?" I said. I looked at her husband and saw that he was Danny Breer. So there I was, riding the Tower of Terror with one of my heroes. We were dressed almost identically. It was also Danny's birthday. Edit. I've only told this story to my family, but no one interested in field hockey knows who I'm talking about. Story 20. When I was about 8 years old, I was playing outside with a friend and her little brother, 2 or 3 years old. My friend was riding her bike slowly on the sidewalk and I was walking beside her, but her brother insisted on riding his tricycle in the middle of the street, which was a dead end with no movement. There was a funeral home nearby, and they often parked their hearse on that street. The little guy was right behind the hearse, and the hearse suddenly started moving backwards. He almost ran over me, so I quickly pulled him off the tricycle. I am still horrified that he was run over and killed that day by the hearse that was supposed to go to his funeral. Sometimes when I see him on the street, I wonder if he remembers almost dying that day. Story 21. When I was about 6 years old, I was in the ball pit at McDonald's play place. The other kids and I were playing a game where we would grab kids who were trying to escape from the ball pit and throw them back. One kid tried to run away, and I grabbed his leg. He was an amputee and I grabbed his prosthetic leg. I was 6 years old and didn't even know that I could lose a limb. His prosthetic leg came off, and all of a sudden, I was holding on to a strange child's leg with both hands. I screamed, cried, apologized, and ran to my parents, who had to explain the concept of amputees at McDonald's. Story 22. I fell off a cliff and landed in an extremely cold, shallow river, and when I got up I realized I had landed on my bike and the pedals were stuck in my butt cheeks. I walked 2 kilometers in the river, pushing my busted bicycle back to my car. My key fob was dented from the water, so I had to use my keys, but my hands were too cold to use them, so I started the car and drove with my elbows. My cell phone was wet, so I drove to the ranger station. The ranger station was closed for the season, so I tried the cell phone, but my hands were cold, so I used my tongue. The medic wondered why I put my bike in the car before I called for help. Edit. Considering everyone I know has avoided talking about my bike for decades, I am very surprised I won the Gold Award. Story 23. I may have met Christopher Walken while working at a fast food restaurant. A guy came in who looked familiar. He had been here a few days before or something, so I figured that's why he looked familiar. I took his order and asked him to write his name on the order. He laughed and said, "Chris?" Why did he laugh? I didn't know at the time. A few days later, I noticed that the man looked like Christopher Walken. He said his name was Chris, and he chuckled, probably because I didn't realize he was Christopher Walken. Story 24. When I was 12 to 13 years old, my parents found a USB drive. Out of curiosity, I put it in my laptop and it was full of data, 15/16 gigabyte. All the files were profiles of individuals in the military, and some were PowerPoint slides of research. Some of these profiles had social security address ranks and where they were stationed. Some are still in Iraq. I thought they might be tracking these and removed the USB. I asked my dad where he found this, and he said it was at the train stop at the airport. I only used it to see what else I could find when I was in high school or college. Edit. I am going to find it and destroy it. Story 25. We were playing Cards Against Humanity with a couple we have known for several years. One of the cards was about bisexuality, and the husband of the other couple brought up something slightly but overtly condescending. The wife defends the bisexual in response, and he doubles down. Both my wife and I admitted to being bisexual. It was an uncomfortable moment, but it passed. A little later, we were all buzzed, and the husband admitted that he wanted to watch his wife have a threesome with another woman. We told him that bi did not mean we were into three ways or swinging, but simply our body type, and that we had never had a threesome. By polyamory. We told him, no offense, you never know unless you bring it up, but watch out. We had to tell him that his wife might get what she wants. We continued our weekly game night for another 3 or 4 months. One day, while I was at work, he texted me that he had finally asked his wife out for a threesome. I warned him again to be careful what he asks for and to watch his expectations. I haven't heard from him in a while. The Facebook feed continued as before, nothing particularly interesting. About 6 months later, her status changed from married to it's complicated. I ask my wife if she knows anything about it. She says, "Oh yeah, my wife decided that women are much better in bed than she is." My wife tried to explain it to me, tried to convince herself that she was wrong, but after the 15th three-way, for 6 months, she decided their relationship, which was mostly just mutual attraction anyway, was over. She didn't just give up on him. She gave up on the guy completely. A month later, I was in the car on the phone when the guy said, "I told you so." As I was saying, "Poor guy." That was our last conversation. Story 26. My dog and I have a special bond. I know it sounds cheesy, but hear me out. When I was in 8th grade, my dad brought home a puppy from my uncle's dog. She was a Jack Russell Terrier, and she was a nervous little thing who cried and peed on my dad's hand when he pulled her out of the truck, and cried when my brothers and mom tried to get near her. But the first time I tried to get to her, she wagged her tail and started kissing me. I fell in love right then and there. Unfortunately, she peed on most of our furniture, which made my parents mad. I tried my best to train her to pee outside, but at the time I didn't know how to do that and my parents were fed up with her. They tried 3 times to sell her to someone. The first 2 times they sold her to someone nearby, but both times she ran away and came back. The 3rd time they sold her to someone on the other side of downtown Los Angeles. I forget the exact location, but it must have been at least 3 miles away. I forget which neighborhood, but it had to be at least 3 miles away. But the next day, when I went outside to let my other dog do her business, she was sleeping in front of the sidewalk fence. I didn't care if she peed on my slippers. I couldn't imagine the nightmare of walking across downtown Los Angeles in the middle of the night. 8 years have passed since then. Story 27. I grew up in Texas state parks. My mother was a park ranger and I always went to work with her from an early age. To this day, I have an innate love of the wild and know more about alligators, snakes, plants, insects, and birds than most people think. Driving around with friends, I would suddenly exclaim, "Wow!" And I am constantly reminded of how much of a weirdo I am. Look at the northern harrier. It's amazing even in its grayest months. Gorgeous. And then I'll sit around the grill or campfire and I'll cheer up and say, "Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. That's a great horned owl over there." I usually get nothing but odd looks and the conversation goes back to normal. Anyway, growing up in a state park, I rode my bike alone all day, anywhere, on trails, on roads, or completely in the wild. The state park was full of live oaks, huge, towering trees. One day, as I was biking downhill at a fair speed, my front tire hit one of these natural arcs. But I didn't. I did a spectacular front flip over the handlebars and landed with both feet planted firmly and both arms outstretched in front of me. After a beat, realizing what had just happened, I raised my arms dainty in the air like a gymnast, skipped back to my bike, and continued on with my day. No one was watching, but I felt like a gold medal winner. Story 28. At age 11, I was the sole survivor and witness of a double murder plus suicide. Here's how it happened. My parents had been divorced since I can remember. As a single mother, I had a wonderful childhood, going to a nice school in the middle of the city, living in a tidy house, spending weekends with my father in the woods or at the lake with my stepmother, stepsister, and various pets we had, and always having lots of family. Both were wonderful lives. Eventually, my father and stepmother divorced. The reason being that my stepmother was an unfaithful troppy. Sorry, I don't know how to say it better. It was the first time I had ever seen a grown man cry. But he recovered and met a woman who lived on a 40-plus acre farm. She was a beautiful woman with gorgeous long hair. I couldn't get enough of this new weekend country life. I had been obsessed with all kinds of animals from day one, and to have a cow, horse, pig, chicken, dog, or cat at my fingertips was the best thing in the world. She also had 3 children, one of whom was my age and loved to climb trees, pet animals, and ride four-wheelers. I didn't know it at the time, but she was also separated from her husband, an ex-military man who was emotionally abusive to her. The story goes like this. It was a beautiful day in June. School had just ended, and it was the weekend. It was Saturday, and we spent the day painting the garage. Of course, as an 11-year-old kid, I begged my father to let me go, because I wanted that noise to end soon. We were going to go, but not on this day. Her children were not at home. They were spending the weekend with their father. But that was okay, because I could have fun at the farm. Honey, my favorite yellow lab, had just had her puppies about a month earlier, so I spent some time playing vet with them. The afternoon turned into evening. The sun was nearing the horizon, and there was not a cloud in the sky. The house is about 120 feet off the county road. There are about 2 cars an hour on the road and the occasional tractor. There is a tree with a hammock in the front of the yard, close to the road. In that hammock, I spent the afternoon with this puppy. I rocked in the hammock, cuddling and loving this puppy. Then I heard the exhaust of an old truck. That's when the feeling hit me. A feeling that can only be described as a sense of impending doom. But why? Why did I feel this? I had seen many trucks driving at breakneck speed on this country road. Why did this one truck cause cold sweats, abdominal cramps, and a pounding heart? Within a very short time, the sound of the trucks began to cave in on itself and my vision clouded over. The only sensation my little brain associated with it was pure and utter terror. My sound and vision quickly returned as the truck pulled into the driveway and began speeding toward the farmhouse where my father was sitting on a picnic bench. The truck came to a quick stop in the gravel driveway just as she came out of the farmhouse yelling, "No," with her hands in the air. My father got out of the truck, and she stood about 10 to 15 meters away from him. She was still yelling. I heard a loud bang and watched in slow motion as my father's head exploded and pieces of flesh flew into the air. I watched my father slump over the picnic table and convulse. I honestly don't even know how he reacted. Maybe she started crying. Maybe she started screaming. Maybe she looked away. But then I noticed her running. Up the driveway, toward the road, toward me. She ran to the middle of the road and collapsed. I ran to her and tried to help her. Through her eyes, I saw her dying. I touched her face and held her. I remember thinking, it's just blood. Just hold her. She was no longer responding and had so many wounds on her chest. I remember being amazed at how she was able to run such a long distance with so many bullets. At this point, I stood up in the middle of the road and looked back at the farm, but immediately could not see the man. I took a breath and pictured myself inhaling my courage. It was blue in color. I don't know why I remember it this way. I knew I needed to go into the farmhouse to call the police. 90s. No cell phones. But I was terrified that a man would be waiting for me inside the house. So I slowly made my way down the driveway with the puppy in my arms, wary of everything. That's when I spotted him lying in the grass near the picnic table. I stopped dead in my tracks. He was playing dead, I thought, waiting to get up and kill me. I stood there, staring, listening. I had to do it. I had to run between my father and him and get inside the house. I locked the door, picked up the phone and dialed 911. I told the woman what happened, but I didn't know where I was. I was from the city and had a 4-digit house number. The farm had a red and white metal signpost with multiple numbers at the end of the driveway. When I told her I needed to get back outside, she yelled, "Don't let go of the phone." I didn't. Through the phone I could see the scene outside the window, and my father was convulsing. I had to go help him. I told her I wanted to help him. She then told me that I could not help him because the nervous system continues to fire even after death. Just then I saw a car coming down the road, and I told the woman that someone was here and I was going. I heard her start to plead with me, but it was too late. For the last 5 minutes, I was incredibly alone in this world. I had a strong feeling that I needed someone alive. I ran. It was a young blonde woman, 20 to 30 years old, and her boyfriend, who spoke no English. They stopped for a dead woman in the middle of a county road. She saw me running and ran toward me with her arms outstretched. She grabbed me and held me and did not let go. She sat on the grass with me and rubbed my back with her puppy. My poor boyfriend looked distraught, and she kept speaking in his language in a very somber, comforting tone. Then she spoke to me in English as well. I honestly don't know exactly how it happened, but the police and ambulance arrived and I sat with the lady and her puppy near the hammock where it all started. Maybe 30 to 60 minutes passed, and the sun was about to set on the horizon when I was told to leave the puppy and get in the ambulance to go to the hospital. I refused to leave my puppy. The EMTs weren't going to force me, and that dog was the only living thing I had with me in the midst of such trauma. I don't remember ever leaving the woman who held me, but I want you to know that I love her and hope her boyfriend is okay. When I arrived at the hospital, my grandparents came to pick me up. My grandparents were not connected to my mother's home phone. I don't remember where I stayed that night or how I got back to my mother's place, but I know I had that Daoin dog with me. So this man, my estranged husband, left the 3 kids at his house. He told the kids to watch a movie and he would be back later, and left to kill my mother. I don't know if he knew my father was there or not, but he killed him too and took his own life. My father lived until they put him in the ambulance, but he died in the hospital. I remember watching them put him on the stretcher and thinking, why are they helping him? I even thought about running up to the stretcher and knocking it over. I have only told this story to 6 people. I have only told this story to 6 people because it always brings tears to my eyes when I tell it. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, and where do I start this conversation? How should people react? People are always apologizing. I survived. I survived. Fear and adrenaline are powerful. I have been told I was dealt a bad hand. I have experienced, survived, and thrived. I have never felt the world owes me anything, and I am not afraid that everyone is out to get me. You can't know good without bad, and the grass isn't always greener on the other side. I have thought about this event often over the last 23 years. Feelings. What was that feeling? I knew what to fear, but how did my body and brain know that I should fear this random truck even before it entered the roadway? This one feeling is the only thing that has stayed with me forever and proves that there is something far more powerful than I could ever imagine. Some might call it God, but I disagree. It is an energy, a wavelength, and I could see it in color through my cloudy vision. It was the biology and chemistry of not only my body, but of all that surrounds us. It was physical and I could feel it. What was it? Story 29. In 2010, I went to a Skrillex show. After the show, my friend and I were having a smoke in the back of the venue when Skrillex and his gang came out the back door. We took a few pictures and asked him if he wanted to share the L joint we had rolled up for after the show. He looked us up and down and said, "Sure. Meet me at the hotel. I'll be in the back of the tour bus. See you later." Cue the poop SHT. We keep our cool on the surface and tell him we'll meet him there. We jump in the car and drive to the hotel he was staying at, about 20 minutes away. As we drove around the back, the tour bus was nowhere to be seen, and I began to wonder if this was a ploy to entertain the bored musicians on their long tour. Then I saw a large black bus parked quietly in the back of the parking lot. As I went to knock on the door, Skrillex opened it and gave me a hearty hug and said, "You are my new best friend." Once on the bus, he introduced me to his friends, the tour manager, and Zed, who was touring with us at the time. As we smoked pot in the back of the bus, he played me a song that had yet to be released. He talked about how he never wore the same pair of underwear twice on tour and other nonsense. And after we had been there about an hour, the door opened and another DJ, Porter Robinson, walked in. He started demanding a dance party. So Zed played a personal show for about 8 of us, and we danced and smoked until the sun came up. It was truly legendary at the time. I will never forget it and tell this story every chance I get. Story 30. A family friend is from South India and lives in the US. Her family is full of artists, but one day she saw a small painting of a path and a front door, and for some reason was moved by it. It was a nondescript painting, and since she has so many works of art, it was odd that she was even attracted to this very ordinary piece. A few years later, she was going to South Africa on business. She stayed in Cape Town and took a sightseeing tour. She went to an old castle and took a very whitewashed tour. She said yes, of course, and went around to the other side of the building, and lo and behold, there was the front door as depicted in her painting, as if it were an image of an exact number. But even stranger, the place has a history of slyery and a temporary art exhibit in the basement. But it turns out that all the slies were brought from Kerala, South India. This really happened, and it is hard to explain without either insane coincidence on many levels or some cosmic magic. Story 31. Last year, one day in November, I found a dead cat while making a delivery. The poor thing was still lying there after a few days, so I took it to find out who it belonged to. At first, nothing was found, so my mother decided to bury the cat in the yard and put up only a message with a picture. The next day, my mother began to hesitate and dug up the cat again. My mother took the cat to the vet to see if it was chipped. Actually, it was one of the cats we thought it was, but the dirt and blood had obscured the white part. Poor thing was missing for 3 months and then was hit by a car and died. The next day I was away for the morning, and there was no one home. I came home, did my business inside, and when I went outside, I saw a strange cat walking beside my car. There aren't many cats around here, so it was a little odd to see a cat I had never seen before. So I called her over. Cute cat. I alerted my parents and asked around to the others. Nothing. Meanwhile, this cat keeps walking with me. I checked the internet to see if she was missing, but nothing within a 10 kilometers radius. She is obviously hungry, as she steals our cat's food. In fact, the cats didn't care about her. Later in the evening, I decided to check the sites within a 20-kilometer radius one last time. I found her. Page 2. There she was. So I called the site and contacted one of the owners. The same evening, in less than an hour, she was taken into custody. She had been missing for a month and had probably jumped in my daughter's car and escaped from our proximity. She was a real sweetie. TLDR. Within a week we found 2 cats. One was unfortunately dead, but the other was very much alive. Story 32. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, I found an older woman who had escaped from a nursing home and was looking for her family. She was too old to remember much. Long story short, I spent the afternoon talking to her, buying her food, and together we went to the police station to help her get back to where she had escaped. She cried and thanked me that God had sent me as an angel to take care of her. I still think of her from time to time. I wish she could have found some peace, and I could have given her happiness that day. I won't talk about it because it might make me seem like a braggart or someone who does something nice to post on social media. I hate those people. Edit. Thank you, kind stranger. Story 33. When I was about 9 years old, my sister and I were babysitting a friend and playing Super Smash Bros. On their Wii. One time, early in the fall, we went to hang out and play. They were probably playing tag. I came across a large blue sheet they had spread out on the ground. I assumed they had taken this to camp and were drying it out because it had gotten wet. In fact, it was a pool cover. I ran about 3/4 of the way across the pool before everyone panicked. Side note, one summer at a BSA activity, everyone learned to dive. My friend who was practicing dove in first, and he dove in well. I followed him. It had been a long time since I had dived, but it was near perfect. Story 34. When I was a little girl, my family and I always went to the family coffee shop. We were regulars there because we used to go there almost every weekend. One time I had to poop. So we went into the bathroom and did what we had to do. We had been pinching this monster for a while, so it was a relief when we finally got it out. But when I went to flush it, the worst thing happened. It started to overflow. In my childish mind, I thought that if I flushed it a few more times, it would stop. It got worse, and the poop splashed all over the bathroom floor. I locked the bathroom door and left, fearing that someone would find me. Terrible, terrible, isn't it? My parents and I sat in the cafe for a bit before leaving. While we were out, I looked back and saw water leaking through a siac in the bathroom door. 2 weeks later, the store closed because they didn't have enough funds to reimburse us for the water repairs. I still regret that terribly. And for obvious reasons, I never got the chance to get this story off my chest. Story 35. Finally a place to tell my story. I'm from the US. So, between my sophomore and junior year of college, I studied abroad in Spain for a summer semester. The study abroad period was about 5 weeks, so I had 3 weekends to do whatever I wanted. The other 2 weeks were spent traveling back and forth. Our group decided we wanted to go to Paris for the long weekend and booked our flights and other arrangements. We flew out to Paris for the second week of our stay in Europe. We landed at the airport and hopped on a bus to our hostel. About 30 minutes after we left, I needed my wallet. I look around for my wallet. No matter where I look, it is not there. It was nowhere to be found. I was pissed. My wallet contained my ID, cash for the weekend trip, and all my cards. So, naturally, I was in full panic mode. Unable to help myself, I arrived at the hostel, but there was nothing to pay for the room. I had no choice but to use the phone to call my father, who thankfully picked up. This at least gave me a place to stay, but not enough to pay for the activities I had planned. The next morning I was stuck in the hostel and reluctantly called my father again. I was in a foreign country and didn't speak the language, so I basically wandered the streets of Paris alone, looking for a place to pick up the cash. After an hour of searching, I found it, had the cash wired to me, and now I could enjoy my vacation. This is the crazy part. Then a year later, I read online about hidden messages on Facebook, sort of like a spam folder for Facebook messages. I was curious, so I looked at my spam folder. A flight attendant on a flight who lost her purse is worried about whether the purse is mine and how to get it back. A year later, if I had checked my spam folder, I wouldn't have had to travel without my wallet. TLDR. While studying abroad, I lost my wallet on a flight from Spain to France. A year later, I saw a message from the flight attendant on that flight, saying that I had lost my wallet on a flight from Spain to France, and that she was wondering if it was mine. Story 36. Most people do not know why my schizophrenic uncle was sent to a residential facility when he lived with us as a child. My uncle and I were relatively close, but our conversations were only brief due to his paranoia that he would basically go crazy if overstimulated. Anyway, when I was 16 or 17, my uncle asked if I wanted to join him on his daily walk. I said yes, and we took afternoon walks around the neighborhood. One day, he wanted to walk with me through the woods. I said no and went home. When I told my mother about it, she took it lightly, but said I had done the right thing. So we went for another walk, and he started trying to walk me down the highway. This happened many times. My uncle stopped taking his medication. When my mother questioned my uncle about it, he broke down crying and said he loved me and knew it was wrong. God says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." So, by his logic, he needed to throw me into traffic for his own guilt. I was soaking in the tub when this conversation took place. My mother said something through the door to the effect of, "I'm going to take your uncle to the hospital, so don't leave until we're gone." It was really creepy when my mother told me what had happened. I still visit my uncle from time to time with my family, but obviously our relationship deteriorated after that one incident. Story 37. For my birthday this year, my husband took myself and a few family members to see the redwoods in Humboldt County, CA. We stayed at a lovely VRBO my husband found for us in a very, very small town, population about 300. After a long morning adventure, we were about to head back home for lunch when we saw this awful mess of a house. Think stereotypical, white tea-ash, meth head house with a kiddie pool on the roof. The house itself was behind a chain-link fence, behind which was a pile of trash so piled up you could barely see the house. Smoke was rising from behind the fence. Most of the people in the car thought the trash had burned, but only my husband insisted that something was wrong. He flipped the U over and pulled over to the side of the road on the other side of the house. Sure enough, flames were coming from the roof. My sister-in-law called 911. My husband ran to notify the neighbors, and my brother and I ran to a nearby field to find a farmer on a tractor. The farmer was completely unaware of the fire, and it was difficult to even get his attention. When we pointed out the fire, he replied, When we asked him if he knew who lived there, he said he did not. From here, I ran around the perimeter of the house, searching the house for anyone trapped inside and listening for anyone calling for help. As I rounded the corner of the property, I heard a sitcom laughing from the shack. I said, "Is anyone there?" I shouted. Sure enough, a drugged man emerged from the shed and said, "What?" I replied, "The house is on fire." He replied, "The house is on fire." This time he looked a little worried and said, "What?" I said, pointing frantically. I repeated frantically, pointing my finger, "Fire, fire, fire, fire." The man climbed onto the roof of the house with a garden hose. At this point, neighbors had gathered across the street. The man called for help, and a second, more dazed-looking man came out. He was instructed to turn on the hose and staggered up to it, water coming lightly from his mouth. "We need more hoses," the first man says, to which the second man replies, "No more hoses." Soon the volunteer fire department from the next town over arrived and quickly got the situation under control. We decided to leave. The "I need more" line became an inside joke among us. Story 38. I saved a mother and her infant from drowning on our honeymoon. My wife and I were on our honeymoon in Fiji on a day cruise around the islands. We stopped for lunch on a small island with a swimming pool. We hung out in the deeper end of the pool, about 10 meters by 5 meters, drinking beer. The shallow end of the pool was about 1 meter deep, and it turned out that there was a vertical drop-off in the middle of the pool that suddenly became about 2.5 meters deep. I guess it's really a safe place to be. Anyway, a young mother was walking in the shallow end of the pool with her baby daughter. She walked too far above the pool and stepped onto the edge of this drop-off. Her daughter fell straight down the pool and panicked, waving her arms around and screaming. The woman who was with me also panicked, and I realized that neither of us could swim. At that moment, my intuition kicked in. I ignored what my wife was saying, slammed down my beer, which turned out to be the first of many times this happened, and pushed off the side of the pool toward this woman. With the momentum, I scooped her and her daughter up with ease and put them back on the shelf. Adrenaline is a strange thing. As a kid growing up in Australia, I took swimming lessons for granted, but that one time definitely paid off. Story 39. In 2014, I was working in Europe and met with a potential licensee. I worked for the parent company, which licensed franchises internationally. We were having dinner about 30 miles outside of Barcelona. The waitress spoke only Spanish, and we didn't speak Spanish, but we managed to communicate. When we returned to our car after dinner, we found a Policia sticker on it instead of our car. We were given directions and walked a few blocks to the train station. The man I was with was a successful businessman in the Middle East, and since he was from Syria, he had a Syrian passport. The policeman only knew Spanish, so again I had no idea what he was saying. Eventually, we set up Google Translate on their computer and tried to communicate with them. They ask for our passports and do not flinch at my American passport, but look surprised at my Syrian passport. They began to ask us interrogative questions about why we were there. We explained the company we worked for. They organize fitness events all over the world. Eventually, we were told that we had to pay a fine of 90 euros for illegal parking. At this point, we were pretty relaxed, and they started asking how much it would cost to allow us entry to the event. I grabbed my keyboard and typed in 90. It was a very cool moment between three people who didn't speak each other's language: a young American, a Syrian businessman, and 3 Spanish police officers. They decided not to charge us a parking ticket, and we shook hands and walked out the door. Story 40. I went to a party at a coworker's, let's say his name is Jim, house. One of the attendees went upstairs and was messing with the girls at the party. They were messing with NL beads, and from what I heard, he didn't know how to use them, and she didn't explain how to do it either. He didn't pull the AL beads out slowly. He pulled them out like he was moving a lawn mower. She pooped on the bed. It was like an explosion at the foot of the bed. The bed belonged to Jim's parents. The bed belonged to Jim's parents, who were away for the duration of the party and were to return the next morning at 8 a.m. from their belongings. We, myself and 6 others, tried to clean the bed, but it didn't work. Jim called around town and found an identical mattress for sale for around $1,000. Jim's parents could have killed him. The new mattress arrived. I unpacked it and tried to jump on it so it wouldn't feel like new. We were young and dumb and thought it would help. Then Jim's parents arrived. Me and the other 2 were still there, and he tells them we came for breakfast and study. Jim's mother seems very excited and tells us that the movers will be using the room and that we need to make space in the backyard. 2 men come in carrying a new shape memory mattress. They went upstairs and came down with the old mattress, completely wrapped in black plastic. Story 41. I was living in Los Angeles. I was talking to a guy who lived in Los Feliz, and after about a month we decided to go out to dinner and finally meet in person. We met on OkCupid's OkStupid. Anyway, we decided to meet on a Friday night after work. I texted him earlier in the day and told him that I really needed to pick up some things at my ex-boyfriend's house and that I would be running a little late. Due to the traffic in LA, I decided not to pick up the item, an external hard drive, I think, from my ex-boyfriend, and headed to the restaurant. I had forgotten to apply my eyeliner and mascara that morning. I know it sounds vain, but I really like my eyes. Anyway, I ran into CVS in Los Feliz. As I was walking towards the cosmetics section, I saw Colin Farrell looking at a box of hair dye. Colin Farrell. I'm a big Hollywood fan. I felt like a star. Our eyes met for just a second, and he dropped his dyed hair on the ground and he picked it up and started to turn away. Freaking mascara and eyeliner. I felt the need to apologize, so I blurted out, "Hey, I'm really sorry I startled you. Gahahaha, my pants are covered in lady cream." After that reply, I did something very gushy now that I think about it. May I take a picture? Sound of my palms. Who reads this? Please do not do what I did. It's annoying for celebrities who want you to respect their private time. He was very kind and did me a favor. My date asked, "Where are you?" I texted. I didn't say anything, only returned with a picture of me with Colin Farrell. Story 42. I was in a college short story class about 12 years ago, and the professor was talking about guidelines for final papers. She said, "Wikipedia isn't very reliable, and anyone can go to the website and edit it." Then she said, "Last semester in class, I looked up O.J. Simpson on Wikipedia.com and showed them an example where it didn't say anywhere that O.J. killed his wife. So I edited it to say O.J. Simpson killed his wife." Suddenly, the kid sitting next to me got up, grabbed his backpack, and walked out of the classroom. I thought nothing of it. But then the guy sitting across from me said, "You know that's his son, right?" He said, "You know that's his son, don't you?" It's a funny story. When the teacher was using O.J. Simpson as an example on Wiki, what are the odds that O.J. Simpson's son was in this class of about 30 students? Story 43. A few years ago, I was volunteering at a cat shelter on a fairly regular basis. On my way home one day, I noticed 2 little kittens running on the shoulder of a very busy bridge. I quickly pulled over, got out of my car, grabbed the kitten closest to me and put her in my car. The second kitten wasn't so easy. She was a little more than a few feet away from me. She ran under my car and hid in the wheel well, i.e., she climbed up the tires and basically stayed in my car. The poor kitty was terrified and out of reach. Meanwhile, I'm basically blocking the entire lane on this incredibly busy bridge, and now I can't start driving without hurting the kitten. Animal control didn't show up, even though it was Tuesday afternoon. I called the police non-emergency line and help arrived. About 30 minutes later, with the help of 4 officers, I finally pulled the kitten out from under the car. The officers then handed the kitten to me and basically said, "We'll see you later. Goodbye." I said, "So now this 19-year-old college student is responsible for these 2 ridiculous kittens who are still scared, biting and clawing at me, and trying to run out of the car and into the street again." The cat shelter I came from was a no-kill shelter, and they refused to let me bring them in, but I was not willing to take them to a no-kill shelter on the other side of town. So I took them to the shelter where I had volunteered, hoping for forgiveness, not permission. Luckily, the shelter had room for the kittens. Thank goodness I was inside, lol, and I was able to name them. I named them Lily and Nori, and they were adopted as a pair the following week. Story 44. My brother asked me to create a spooky scavenger hunt for him and his friends for a Halloween party. We had 2 hours to prepare, and only one other person was with me. What I came up with was this. They were handed a forged letter from a mental hospital in the next town over explaining that they needed to transport high-threat patients in a white van. They walked around in the field behind us until they spotted a white van with warning lights on. As we approached, we found the side of the van stained with blood and a partially destroyed diary on the front seat. Walking back toward the house, I saw all the lights go off at once. My friend had pushed the breaker. Once inside the house, they panicked and found a note that had been rewritten by the PSJO. It was mostly chatter, but they could make out a few words like upstairs, little girl's room, and mirror. They cautiously entered the sister's room and found the note written backwards. As they held it up to the mirror to read it, my friend ran through the rooftop window directly behind them and could see his reflection in the mirror. This set them in motion. The note said, "Follow the knock." A few minutes later, a knock sounded from my room across the hall. They slowly made their way inside, but it took a while. The next note was written by PS Joe, who ranted again and told them to get something sharp to protect themselves. They ran to the knife drawer and found hundreds of scraps of paper with the words, "Knife, where's the knife?" and "Maybe in the basement." They found hundreds of pieces of paper with "Maybe in the basement" written on them. After a search, they found a crawl space in a closet with the door removed. A note stabbed into the wall with a PS Joe pin read, "Come in." Gathering their courage, they went inside and lost track of their black-clad friends as they ran down the basement stairs and the closet door slammed shut. But with the little time we had been given to think about a scavenger hunt, we could only go so far. So we just kept wandering around the house. They accused me of saying my friend was a PS Joe, so I let him pretend to get dressed and pull up to the house, and he asked them what was going on. We were sitting in the kitchen when we heard a loud ERRYYYHHH scream. My friend and I froze and looked at each other wide-eyed. We were like, "This isn't happening. What is going on?" My brother started crying, waking up my parents, and I was in trouble. His friend never came back and I felt kind of bad. TLDR, I created an elaborate and scary scavenger hunt for my brother and his friends, but didn't have time to finish it. My dog scared us all. I made my brother cry and traumatized his friends. Story 45. You know those rip-off arcade machines in shopping malls? The ones where you have to cut ropes and put keys through holes that are almost the same size, and look how contrived they are. I got my first iPad at one of those arcades back around 2011, I think, right after the iPad came out. It cost me $25 to get it. You may wonder why, but the box is empty and inside is a piece of paper detailing how to get the prize since it is a high-value item. They then ship it to you. Another cool thing is that if you send them a picture of you winning a prize next to the machine, you get $25 cash. So I got an iPad for free, and my picture and name were displayed for a while in the little machine at the mall. I told my friends about it, but that was it. I don't have any situations to tell that story, but I did prove that it wasn't completely dishonest. Story 46. I have posted this before, but have yet to find a way to put it in an actual conversation. One day, my father was at a bar with a friend from work when a tall, well-built Russian man walked in. He wanted to sit on a stool near my father, but instead of finding a regular empty stool, he went to a chair where a petite woman was sitting and literally threw her off the chair and yelled that he wanted that chair. My father saw this and immediately said, "Hey, what are you doing?" and tried to intercede. My father brushed it off, but then noticed that his Russian male friends had started to join in. About 4 large men inside and another 4 outside. At this point, my father got nervous and decided to call the head of security, HOS, at the company he worked for. Remember, my father was the managing director of Kazakhstan at the time. The HOS told my father to wait at the bar for him to arrive, and after a few nervous drinks with his work friends, about 30 bodyguards, they crowded into the bar and began to form a line from my father to the exit of the bar. In his country, all bodyguards carry pistols, and the 30 or so bodyguards formed a wall on either side of my father. The HOS put him in his car, and 2 more black BMWs escorted him home. Not the most insane story, but I thought it was insane to hear my father tell it to me.